There are plenty of things we tend to take for granted, and high on that list would have to be trees. Imagine what our streets and parks would look like without them, and how planting the right ones can make a huge difference to our environment and our lives. Green Adelaide board member Kelvin Trimper is always keen to talk about the importance of trees in the landscape.
Tree canopy is vital to us, Kim, here in Adelaide. We need it to cool, we need it for our animals, and above all, it looks good. We've got to look to the future. We've got to look at the trees that we need to plant now that are going to survive our climate conditions in 20, 30, 40 years' time, which we know are going to be hotter. So the other challenge we have, Kim, is we have infrastructure. We have above ground infrastructure in terms of power lines, we have below ground infrastructure, and unfortunately that infrastructure and trees sometimes doesn't mix well. What we need to do, working together with the botanic gardens, nursery and garden industry, arborists, all the infrastructure providers that we can muster, Green Adelaide, local government, we have to work together to identify which trees are the right trees to plant in the right place now, so that they don't interfere with the infrastructure going forward, but importantly give us a cooler, greener, more climate resilient city.
Someone who knows all about how trees impact our power supply and why correct tree selection is critical is South Australian Power Network's Manager of Vegetation, Connell.
SA Power Networks is the sole distributor for electricity around the network in South Australia. So that's all the poles and wires which covers our state. The state is divided into a bushfire risk area and a non-bushfire risk area. There is legislation which covers the relationship between the power lines and vegetation, and we're required to be compliant with that legislation, and they have clearance zones which vegetation can't encroach into. In the non-bushfire risk area, like Milton Avenue, we cut this once every 3 years. But in the bushfire risk areas, we review those annually. Vegetation management is the largest single operating expenditure for SA Power Networks. This year we'll spend in excess of $40 million maintaining the vegetation. The long-term strategy is around about having the right tree in the right place. And we're doing a lot of work with communities and our advisory group and our LGA working group in working out which one's the most appropriate tree to have on our list. It's approved by the OTR. We're also working largely with the advisory committee. So this advisory committee was formed recently, and it has the industry experts from around South Australia to help us pick which are the best trees to go on that approved appropriate list. And we undertook control at the city of Campbelltown. So now we have actually visibility of the trees we're not cutting. Now that is really important, so we can then identify what trees are growing well but don't require cutting. Many families across South Australia have challenges with costs of living and the increase in costs of living. So if we can have the right tree in the right place, we can reduce those costs and we can pass those benefits then on to the community.
Campbelltown City Council has taken a lead in trialling and assessing trees for streetscapes, and their manager of urban trees, Haavisto, is the ideal person to tell us more. What sort of range of trees do you plant in Campbelltown?
We have a selection that are particularly for power lines, so the key thing is their height. But we're looking for shape, we're looking for its form, we're looking for its structure. We're looking for something that will give us a canopy. This is still in its juvenile stage, even though it is 12 years old. Through our trials, we're seeing that the Gidgera is performing and staying below the size of the power lines. It's quite a slow-growing tree, but quite stable, very drought tolerant.
So you're working with SA Power Networks and sharing your information about all the trees that you've got planted around, and you know where every tree is in the city of Campbelltown.
Yeah, exactly. What we're doing is we're basically providing that data to SA Power Networks.
Effectively, you can say these trees don't need as much pruning as these trees, so we'll plant more of the ones that don't need a lot of pruning.
Absolutely.
There's a lot happening with trees, reliable power and a renewable energy focused network. In fact, SA Power Networks are working on their reset engagement for 2025 to 2030 right now, and want to tap into the community to find out what we think is important for South Australia's energy future. To be part of that and have your say, simply head to the Talking Power website.